Caleb had lived alone on the far edge of the plains for so many years that most people in town barely remembered what his voice sounded like. He was a quiet cowboy, the kind who did his work, paid his dues, and returned home before sunset. He wasn't rude or unfriendly. He simply kept to himself. Some men respected that. Others used it as an excuse to bother him. They liked to joke that Caleb lived like a ghost, silent and alone, with only horses and dry wind for company. Caleb never argued. He simply let their words pass the way he let dust pass through the air. One hot afternoon, the men gathered at the saloon after loading supplies. They drank loudly, boasting about cattle, horses, and anything else they could think of. Caleb came only to collect nails and a new rope for his corral. He tried to leave quickly, but the men noticed him. A few grinned at each other, whispering, then looked his way with mischief in their eyes. Caleb had seen that expression before. Nothing good ever followed it. "Caleb," one of them shouted. "We got something for you today." Caleb paused, holding his supplies. "I don't need anything," he said calmly. "But you do," the man insisted, laughing. The others roared with laughter, some slapping their knees like children. Caleb didn't react. He waited, knowing the only way to end their noise was to let them finish whatever joke they planned. One of the men stood up and motioned for someone outside to bring something forward. But it wasn't a something. It was a someone. A woman stepped into the doorway, leaning on the frame for support. She had long, dark hair tangled from wind, clothes dusty from travel, and a faint limp in her right leg that made her movement slow and painful. Her eyes looked tired, filled with confusion and hesitation. The men pushed her lightly toward Caleb. The room burst into laughter again. Caleb didn't laugh. His jaw tightened as he watched the woman trying to balance herself while facing the crowd. She looked scared, almost shrinking into herself, as their laughter echoed around her. She didn't speak, but her expression asked a silent question. Why was she here? Caleb stepped forward just enough to block some of the men's eyes on her. "Where did she come from?" he asked quietly. "We found her limping near the creek," a man answered. "Figured you could use company. You won't find a bride out here on your own." More laughter followed, louder this time. Caleb could feel anger rising in his chest. He wasn't angry for himself. He was angry for her. This was no kind of joke. She stood with her hands close to her chest, shoulders pulled inward, as if trying to make herself smaller. Caleb turned to her. "Ma'am," he said softly, "did you agree to come here?" She shook her head lightly. "No. They said I needed help." "I didn't know." Her voice cracked with embarrassment. Caleb didn't need to hear more. He put down the rope and nails, stepped beside her, and gave the men a long, steady look. "She's not a joke," he said, "and she's not a gift." "Aw, come on, Caleb." One man laughed. "We were just having fun." "Your fun ends here," Caleb replied. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough strength to silence them. The woman looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected anyone, least of all a stranger, to defend her. Caleb nodded to her gently. "You can come with me," he said. "Let's get you out of here." She nodded back, relief and uncertainty mixing in her eyes. Caleb guided her outside, making sure she didn't stumble on the wooden step. His horse waited by the post, shifting slightly in the dirt. Caleb helped her onto the saddle with care, making sure her injured leg rested comfortably. She winced once, but did not complain. Caleb led the horse on foot as they left the town behind. The noise of laughter faded, replaced by open air, quiet sky, and the wide stretch of land Caleb called home. The road was long and calm. The woman clutched the saddle horn to steady herself, her breathing settling slowly. After a few minutes, Caleb spoke softly so he wouldn't startle her. "What's your name?" "Mara," she answered. I'm sorry. I didn't want to cause trouble for you." You didn't, he said. They caused the trouble. You just happened to be there. She looked down at her hands. They said you wouldn't mind. They said you lived alone, so... She didn't finish the sentence. Caleb understood anyway. They say many things about me, he replied. Most of them untrue or unkind. You don't have to worry about any of it. Mara nodded slowly. Still unsure, but comforted by his gentle tone. Caleb continued walking, guiding the horse carefully over bumps in the road. He glanced at her leg. The limp wasn't from something new. The stiffness and pain in her movements showed she'd been hurt for a long time. The journey must have been difficult for her. When they reached Caleb's ranch, the sun was falling behind the hills, coloring the plains gold. Mara looked around with quiet amazement. The ranch wasn't grand or impressive, but it was peaceful. A small wooden cabin, a fenced corral, a well, and acres of rolling grassland stretching as far as the horizon. Caleb helped her down from the horse and guided her toward the cabin. You can rest inside, he said. There's food and water. You look like you need both. She hesitated at the door. Are you sure? I'm not troubling you? No, Caleb answered simply. You're hurt. Someone needs to help you get better. That's all. Inside the cabin, Caleb lit a small oil lamp. The warm light filled the room. Mara sat on a stool, her leg trembling slightly from the long ride. Caleb placed a cup of water in her hands. She drank slowly, as if she hadn't had clean water in days. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb nodded and began preparing a simple meal. Beans, bread, and a bit of dried meat. Mara watched him quietly, still trying to understand why a stranger would be so gentle. When he set the food in front of her, she tried to stand and help, but her leg buckled. Caleb quickly steadied her by the arm. You don't have to stand, he said. Just rest. You'll heal better that way. Mara lowered herself back down. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, Caleb said. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. She looked at him with tired eyes. Most people don't say that. Caleb shrugged lightly. Most people aren't out here. For the first time since he met her, Mara smiled a small, soft smile, but real. Caleb felt something warm settle in his chest. Not affection. Not yet. Just a quiet sense that bringing her home had been the right thing to do. After she finished eating, Caleb set a clean blanket on the spare cot in the corner. You can sleep here tonight, he said. Tomorrow, we'll see what we can do for your leg. She touched the blanket lightly, almost as if checking whether it was really meant for her. Thank you, she said again, her voice gentle and sincere. Caleb gave a small nod and stepped outside for a moment to let the cool night air clear his thoughts. The stars were bright, and the plains stretched endless and calm. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes howled. He thought about the men in town, their laughter, the cruelty in their jokes. Then he thought of Mara, frightened, limping, carrying more pain than she let anyone see. He wondered how far she had traveled, what loss or struggle she had endured, and why fate had placed her in his path today. All he knew was that she was safe now, and as long as she stayed under his roof, he would make sure she remained that way. Inside the cabin, Mara lay down slowly on the cot, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. For the first time in many nights, she felt safe. She felt seen. She felt human again. Caleb closed the door softly, letting the quiet settle between them. He didn't know what the coming days would bring, coming days would bring, but something inside him already sensed that this unexpected meeting, born from someone else's cruel joke, was going to change both their lives in ways no one in town could have imagined. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the small window of the cabin and warmed the wooden floor. Caleb was already awake, feeding the horses and checking the fences, when he heard the door open softly behind him. Mara stepped out, moving carefully, her limp noticeable but slightly less painful after the night of rest. She held the edge of the doorframe for balance and watched him work for a moment without speaking. Caleb turned and gave her a small nod. "Morning. Did you sleep all right?" She nodded. "Better than I have in a long time." Her voice was still quiet, but there was less fear in it than the night before. "Good," Caleb said. "You should sit for a bit. Your leg needs time." But Mara shook her head. "I should help. You already did so much for me." "You don't owe me anything," Caleb replied. Mara hesitated, then slowly made her way to a wooden stool near the well. She watched Caleb finish feeding the animals. She noticed he wasn't just quiet because of shyness. He moved like someone who had learned to live peacefully with the land. Someone who didn't waste words or energy. The horses seemed to understand him too. They came willingly when he called, and they nudged his shoulder gently as if greeting an old friend. When he finished, Caleb walked over to Mara and crouched beside her injured leg. "If you don't mind," he said, "I'd like to check how bad the injury is." She nodded, folding her hands in her lap. Caleb examined her leg carefully, touching only where necessary. The injury was old, not from a fresh accident, as he first suspected. The way the muscle tightened and the joint stiffened told him she'd been walking with this pain for a long time, probably without rest or proper care. No wonder she limped. "How long have you been walking like this?" he asked gently. "A long time," Mara admitted. "I didn't have a place to stop. I just kept moving." "Why?" She hesitated, eyes drifting toward the horizon. "I left some things behind. I needed to be far from them." She didn't explain further, and Caleb didn't push. Whatever she carried was heavy. But she would tell him when she was ready. Caleb studied the way her foot angled. He realized she needed something to help her walk properly, something to give support to her leg so the muscles wouldn't strain more. An idea formed quietly in his mind. "I'm going to make something for you," he said. Mara blinked. "Make something?" "A support for your leg. Something to help you walk easier. It won't fix everything, but it'll make things less painful." She stared at him in disbelief. "You would do that for me?" Caleb shrugged lightly. "Doesn't take much to care about people." Mara didn't know what to say. She had been treated as a burden by strangers, laughed at, pushed around. No one had ever looked at her injury and thought of helping, not until this quiet cowboy, who owed her nothing. Caleb went into the shed and began searching through wood, leather straps, and old tools. Mara watched from the stool, curious but unsure how she could ever repay him. Even sitting felt wrong. Her hands twitched as if they wanted to be useful. After a few minutes, she stood slowly and walked to the cabin's small table. She began clearing it, folding blankets, arranging cups, and sweeping dust from the corners. Each movement was careful, and she paused often to rest her leg, but she felt lighter doing something useful. Caleb didn't stop her. He understood that people healed not only through rest but also through feeling needed again. When he came inside to measure her leg for the support, he found the cabin cleaner than it had been in months. Mara gave him a shy smile, almost apologetic. "I thought I should help a little." Caleb nodded gently. "Thank you." He measured the length of her calf and ankle with a thin rope, making sure not to cause discomfort. His hands were steady, and his voice stayed calm, which made Mara feel safe. After noting the measurements, he returned to the shed to begin carving the wood. Mara stayed inside, preparing a simple lunch with what Caleb had: potatoes, beans, and a little bread. She moved slowly, but she refused to stop. She felt warmth in her chest, a feeling she hadn't felt since before her long, difficult journey began. By noon, Caleb returned with the first shaped piece of wood. It was smooth and curved carefully to match the side of her leg. He placed it beside her to test the size. "We're getting closer," he said. Mara looked at the support like it was something magical. "You made this in just a few hours?" she asked softly. "It's nothing special," Caleb replied, but she could tell he put attention into every detail. To Caleb, it wasn't just a piece of wood. It was a way to give someone part of their life back. The next few days followed a peaceful rhythm. Caleb worked on the support, carving and shaping it until it fit Mara perfectly. Mara stayed around the cabin, helping with chores, cooking meals, sweeping, feeding chickens, folding blankets. She always did more than she should, but she also followed Caleb's gentle warnings when she pushed herself too far. After all, she didn't want her injury to get worse. Slowly, she began to open up. She told Caleb small things: how she loved the sound of running creek water, how her mother used to braid her hair, how she always dreamed of living somewhere peaceful. Caleb listened quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes simply nodding. He rarely spoke about himself, but Mara didn't mind. His presence already told her everything she needed to know. One afternoon, as Caleb tightened the final strap on her new leg support, Mara tested her weight on it. Her eyes widened. The pain didn't disappear completely, but it felt lighter, more manageable. She stood straight, something she hadn't done in months. It doesn't hurt as much," she whispered, astonished. Caleb stepped back, watching carefully. "Try walking." She took one step, then another. Her limp was still there, but smaller, softer, almost like a memory instead of a burden. Mara looked at him with tears in her eyes, but not sad tears. Hopeful ones. "I can walk better," she said, a shaky smile spreading across her face. "I can actually walk better." Caleb only nodded, but inside he felt something warm unfold. Seeing someone regain strength because of his effort made him feel more alive than he had in years. From that day, Mara became more confident. She walked around the ranch, helping with tasks she could manage. She learned to feed horses, to hang laundry on the rope line, to carry light buckets of water. Sometimes she stumbled, but Caleb always caught her before she fell. Sometimes he didn't need to. She would steady herself using the leg support he crafted. Their quiet routines slowly formed a bond, one built not on grand gestures but on everyday kindness. Mara began to laugh softly at small things, the way a chicken chased a bug, or how Caleb tried to avoid getting nipped by a stubborn horse. Caleb, who rarely smiled in front of others, found himself smiling when she did. She brought a lightness into his world that he didn't know he had been missing. One evening, they sat outside watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Mara hugged her knees and watched the horses grazing. "I didn't think I'd find a place like this," she said gently. "I didn't think I'd find someone who would care enough to help." "You deserved help," Caleb replied simply. "Everyone does." "You didn't even know me," she whispered. Caleb looked out at the plains. "Sometimes, knowing someone's pain is enough." Mara's eyes softened. She had met many people in her life, but none had spoken words that made her feel understood like this quiet cowboy did. When she finally went inside to rest, Caleb stayed under the open sky a little longer, thinking about how much had changed in just a few days. The ranch no longer felt silent. It no longer felt empty. Even though they were just two people trying to mend two broken parts of life, something new was growing between them. Something gentle, steady, and real. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. Mara had walked into his life, limping, frightened, and alone, but she was already becoming stronger. And he felt a deep sense of pride, knowing he had helped her take the first steps toward a new beginning. The weeks passed quietly on the plains, and the ranch slowly turned into a place full of movement and warmth again. Mara's walk grew steadier every day as she practiced with the support Caleb had made for her. She no longer held the doorway or the furniture for balance as often as before. Sometimes she even forgot she had once limped so badly she could barely stand. The ranch work, the clean air, the calm routine, and the safety she felt with Caleb all worked together like medicine. Caleb noticed the change, of course, but he didn't comment on it much. He simply watched with quiet pride each time she took a longer step or carried something without wobbling. Mara saw the way he looked at her. Not with pity, but with respect. That made her try even harder, not to impress him, but because she felt she finally had a place where her effort mattered. One morning, Caleb came in from the barn with dust on his sleeves. "Need to go to town for supplies," he said. "You can stay here and rest." But Mara shook her head. "I want to come." Caleb hesitated. "It's a long walk around town. Are you sure your leg is ready?" Mara tested her weight on one leg and gave him a small, determined smile. "I've come farther than town. I can do this." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But if you feel tired, you tell me." She agreed with a nod. They set off together toward town, sharing a comfortable silence. Mara walked with a slow, but even rhythm. The sun was warm, and the wind brushed the tall grass around them. Caleb walked beside her without rushing, adjusting his pace to match hers. At times, Mara could feel people's laughter from that day in the saloon, returning to her memory. She wondered what would happen when they saw her again. Would they laugh again? Would they mock Caleb for bringing her? Caleb sensed her worry, even though she said nothing. "You don't have to be afraid of anyone in town," he told her quietly. "You're walking straighter than most of those men ever will." His words struck her deeper than he realized. She felt a surge of courage she hadn't felt in a long time. When they reached town, people immediately noticed them. Conversations paused. A few men nudged each other and stared. But instead of limping behind Caleb like a weak, frightened woman, Mara walked beside him with steadiness. Her shoulders straight, her chin lifted. The support on her leg was hidden beneath her skirt, so no one could see how much work Caleb had put into helping her. The same men who once laughed at Caleb watched her now with surprise. Their eyes followed the way she carried herself, the way she moved without fear, the way her steps were firm, even on uneven dirt. Some looked confused, some embarrassed, and some simply amazed. Mara didn't meet their eyes at first. She focused on keeping her posture steady, her breathing calm. But then she caught a glimpse of something unexpected. Caleb standing tall beside her, no sign of shame or discomfort on his face. He didn't seem bothered by the whispers or stares. He didn't rush her, didn't act different. He simply walked as if everything happening around them was ordinary. Seeing him so calm made her straighten her shoulders a little more. Inside the store, Caleb gathered tools, nails, flour, and horse feed. Mara looked through fabrics, choosing a small piece to make new dishcloths for the cabin. As she reached up for it, her leg wobbled slightly. Caleb was instantly beside her. "You all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she whispered. "Just adjusting." She steadied herself quickly, and Caleb stepped back respectfully, letting her continue on her own. By the time they left the store, whispers had shifted. People were talking not about Caleb's loneliness or Mara's limp, but about how different she looked, stronger, confident, almost glowing with purpose. Some women whispered among themselves, wondering where the cowboy had found such a determined woman. Some of the men who once teased Caleb now avoided his eyes. Outside, Mara breathed deeply. "They were staring," she said quietly. Caleb shrugged. "Let them stare." Mara looked at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you for walking beside me." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Caleb replied simply. On the ride back, Mara sat on the wagon beside him. The land rolled out endlessly ahead of them, golden and peaceful. She watched Caleb's hands on the reins, the calm way he guided the horse, the silent strength he carried with him everywhere. She knew now that his silence wasn't emptiness, it was steadiness. He didn't need loud words. His actions spoke louder than everything the men in town could ever say. Back at the ranch, Mara returned to her chores with renewed energy. She cooked meals, cleaned the cabin, helped mend fences by handing Caleb tools, and even learned to brush the horses without fear. The animals sensed her gentleness, and accepted her quickly. Caleb taught her how to hold the brush, where to stand, and how to calm a restless horse with slow breathing. One evening, while she was brushing his favorite mare, Mara realized she was humming a habit she had forgotten she ever had. Caleb heard her as he stacked hay nearby. His heart warmed at the sound. She was healing, not just physically, but in her spirit. Later that night, they ate dinner together, simple bread, beans, and roasted vegetables. The small cabin felt full. Not because of noise, but because of the quiet comfort they shared. Mara broke the silence. "Caleb, what do people say about you?" "There." He looked up slowly. "Mostly that I'm alone, and strange for choosing to live out here." "Do you feel alone?" she asked softly. Caleb thought for a moment. "I used to, but not anymore." Mara looked down, hiding the shy smile forming on her lips. As days turned into weeks, Mara began working with the animals more confidently. One afternoon, a stubborn calf tried to escape through a broken fence. Mara reacted faster than Caleb expected, stepping in front of it and waving her arms calmly until the calf backed away. Caleb hurried over and helped fix the fence, while Mara held the calf steady. "You're getting good at this," he said with genuine admiration. Mara laughed softly. "I never imagined myself on a ranch." "You fit here more than you think," Caleb replied. Later that night, as Mara sat by the small fire, she watched Caleb repair a saddle strap. His hands were steady and skilled, his eyes focused. She realized how much strength and kindness were hidden in this quiet man. He wasn't the type to brag or shout. He was the type who made a broken thing whole again, whether it was a fence, a saddle, or a person. Townfolk soon started talking. Word spread that the limping woman they had laughed about now worked the ranch stronger than most folks. Stories traveled fast across the plains, some exaggerated, but all filled with curiosity. The young woman who once struggled to take 5 steps without pain now walked across the ranch with purpose. And every time she stepped forward, she felt Caleb's silent support behind her. People began to wonder what had changed her. But the truth was simple. She had been given a chance to heal, and she had worked hard for it. Caleb never took credit, but everyone who saw the two together could sense their connection in the way they talked, worked, and shared quiet moments. One cool evening, as the sky turned violet and the plains turned soft silver under the moonlight, Mara stood outside the cabin and felt a strange warmth in her chest. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She wasn't being helped as a burden, she was building a life with someone who respected her. She looked toward the barn, where Caleb was closing the doors for the night. When he stepped out, he saw her standing under the sky. Their eyes met. Neither said a word, but both felt the quiet truth growing between them. She was no longer the frightened woman given away as a joke, and he was no longer the lonely cowboy people mocked. Together, they were becoming something stronger, something the whole plains would soon take notice of. In the following months, the ranch changed in ways Caleb never expected. What used to be a quiet, almost silent stretch of land slowly turned into a place full of steady rhythm, footsteps, soft laughter, murmured conversations, and the calm sound of 2 people working side by side. Mara had become part of the ranch's heartbeat. She was no longer the limping visitor he once helped into the cabin. She moved with purpose now, with strength that surprised even herself. People in town continued to talk about her. Some were curious, some were impressed, and some were embarrassed because they remembered the day they offered her to Caleb as a cruel joke. Word spread quickly that the woman who once leaned heavily on a doorframe now rode horses, helped mend fences, and walked across the plains with confidence. Mara didn't care about the rumors anymore. Each morning, she woke with a sense of belonging. She had a place, a purpose, and someone who treated her with dignity. Caleb never made her feel small. In fact, he made her forget she ever felt that way. One morning, as the two walked out to tend the horses, Caleb noticed how straight she was standing. "Your walk looks strong today," he said gently. Mara smiled. Sometimes, I forget my leg was ever a problem. Caleb nodded. You earned that strength. You worked for it. Mara looked at him with warmth. You helped me. Caleb shook his head. You helped yourself. I only gave you a support. You carried the rest. Hearing that gave her a quiet pride she held close to her heart. A few days later, a letter arrived from town. It was unusual. Caleb rarely received letters. The mail rider handed it to Mara, while Caleb worked in the barn. She carried it to him and watched as he opened it. His eyebrows rose slightly. What is it? She asked. The spring fair, he explained. They're asking ranchers to bring their cattle for show. It's just folks having a good time. They want me to bring a few. Mara hesitated. Are you going? Caleb shrugged. Never had a reason to before. But you have one now, she said softly. Without realizing she'd spoken the words aloud, Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Maybe I do. So they prepared for the fair together. Mara brushed the horses until their coats shined like polished wood. Caleb cleaned the wagon and checked the harnesses. The days before the fair were filled with gentle excitement, small smiles, shared looks, and a strange feeling that something important was coming. When the morning of the fair arrived, the sun rose clear and bright. Mara, dressed in the best clothes she had, simple, but neat and carefully patched. She tied her hair back gently, leaving a few strands to fall around her face. Caleb noticed how the light caught her eyes and made them look softer than usual. You ready? He asked. She nodded, feeling her heart beat a little faster. Yes. They rode into town together on the wagon. The fairgrounds were already full of people. Children ran between stalls. Horses neighed from behind fences, and music drifted through the air. The moment the wagon rolled in, some men recognized Caleb and Mara. Their laughter didn't return this time. Instead, they straightened their backs awkwardly, or pretended to be busy. Mara stepped down from the wagon slowly. She expected her old limp to return from nerves, but it didn't. She stood tall, her balance steady, and walked across the fairgrounds beside Caleb. People stared again, but not with mockery this time, with quiet surprise. One of the men from the saloon approached, nervous. Mara gave a polite nod. Thank you. Another man rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. Caleb, we were wrong that day. Caleb didn't answer harshly or proudly. He simply nodded. People make mistakes. The men looked relieved, but Caleb didn't stay longer. He didn't need their approval. Mara didn't either. As the day went on, they walked around the stalls, tasted simple foods, and watched the contests. Mara enjoyed seeing children play, women laughing together, and cowboys showing off their skills. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was part of a community again, not someone hiding from the world. Then came the moment that changed everything. A group of townspeople gathered near the main field for a parade of ranchers and their helpers. Caleb was invited to join. He hesitated at first, glancing at Mara. You should walk with me, he said quietly. Mara's heart jumped. Me? You helped the ranch as much as I did, Caleb said. People should see that. She swallowed a nervous breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but then she remembered how far she had come. She nodded. They walked together in the parade. The sun shone brightly, casting long shadows across the ground. As they stepped forward, Mara realized something important. No one was staring at her limp anymore. They were looking at her strength, her calm stride, her confident posture, her steady steps beside Caleb. Some women whispered to each other, impressed by her transformation. Some men stared in silence, remembering their cruelty and feeling the weight of it. Children waved at her, and she actually smiled back. Caleb felt the shift too. He could sense the pride growing in her chest, the ease in her steps, the courage in her eyes. He walked beside her, matching her pace. making sure she knew he wasn't walking ahead or behind. He was walking with her. After the parade, an older ranch woman approached Mara. "I heard you came here limping," she said with kindness. "But look at you now. You're one of the strongest women here." Mara felt her throat tighten. She wasn't used to being praised. "Thank you," she whispered. Another woman added, "People talk, but they don't know your heart. You proved them wrong." Mara felt a soft warmth in her chest. She looked at Caleb. He gave her a gentle nod, as if telling her he had known all along she could do this. As the fair ended, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Mara and Caleb rode back toward the ranch, the wagon creaking softly beneath them. The wind was gentle, brushing her hair across her cheek. Caleb reached out slowly and tucked the strand behind her ear. It was a small gesture, but it made her heart flutter. "You did well today," he said quietly. "So did you," she replied. "You showed them the truth," Caleb added. "And what truth is that?" Mara asked softly. "That you're stronger than they ever believed." Mara looked down for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. "I never thought I'd be someone people could admire." "You earned their respect," Caleb said. "Not because of them, because of who you are." As they approached the ranch, the sky darkened, and stars began to appear one by one. The plains stretched wide, peaceful, and endless. It felt like the whole world had opened up around them. When they reached the cabin, Caleb helped her down from the wagon. She stood for a moment, looking at the ranch, her home now. She felt stronger than she ever had. Proud of the work she had done, proud of the woman she had become. She turned to Caleb, her voice gentle. "Thank you for believing in me." Caleb stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You didn't need belief. You needed a chance. And you gave it to me," she whispered. "I'm glad I did." They stood under the stars, the quiet evening settling around them like a warm blanket. No loud words were spoken. No dramatic promises were made. But something real passed between them. Something steady and deep. Mara had arrived on the plains as a weak, limping woman, laughed at and ignored. But now, she stood strong, confident, and respected. Caleb had helped her heal, but she had helped him too. She filled his lonely days with purpose and warmth. She was no longer a joke. She was no longer a burden. She had become the pride of the plains. And Caleb, the once lonely cowboy, felt grateful every day that she had walked into his life.